The road dust still clung to Drasha Emberfang's boots when she arrived at the human's gate, her heart pounding not from the miles she had walked but from the knowledge that behind her, in the mountain clan territories, a wedding feast was growing cold and a groom was likely bellowing for her blood. She had run, simply run, left Gormath standing at the ceremonial stone with half the clan watching, their tusked faces painted for celebration, and she had turned on her heel and fled like a coward into the forest. The shame should have crushed her, but all she felt now was a desperate, clawing need for something, anything, different than the life that had been carved out for her since childhood. The farmstead before her sat in a valley clearing, modest but well-maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney of a stone cottage with a thatched roof. Fenced pastures held a small herd of goats, and she could see rows of what looked like beans and squash in a garden plot. Everything spoke of careful work, of someone who tended things with patience. Drasha's hand trembled as she reached for the wooden gate. She had no plan beyond this address, whispered to her 3 months ago by an orc woman she had met at the border trading post. "If you ever need to disappear," the woman had said, her voice low and urgent, "there is a human in the southern valley, Dermot Oakes. He helps those who have nowhere else to turn." The gate creaked as she pushed it open, and immediately a dog began barking from inside the cottage. Drasha froze, her green fingers still gripping the weathered wood. She was tall for an orc woman, broad-shouldered and strong from years of hauling water and working leather in her clan's camp. Her dark hair hung in a thick braid down her back, and her small tusks jutted from her lower jaw. She wore traveling leathers, now stained with sweat and forest mud, and carried nothing but a small pack with 2 days of dried meat and her mother's bone knife. The cottage door opened, and a man stepped out. He was human, perhaps 30 years of age, with brown hair that fell just past his ears and a beard that looked recently trimmed. He wore simple clothes, a linen shirt and wool trousers, and his feet were bare despite the cooling evening air. His eyes, she noticed, were hazel, flecked with gold in the dying sunlight. He held no weapon, which surprised her, though his hand rested on the head of the large brown dog at his side. They stared at each other for a long moment. Drasha saw his gaze take in her green skin, her tusks, the way her ears came to points. She waited for the fear, the disgust, the shouted demands that she leave his property. Instead, Dermot Oakes simply asked, "Are you hurt?" The question was so unexpected that Drasha felt her throat tighten. "No," she managed. "I am not hurt, not in body." He nodded slowly as if this made perfect sense. "Are you being followed?" "I do not know," she admitted. "I ran fast and took paths through water to mask my scent, but Gormath is a tracker, he may come." "Gormath," Dermot repeated. "Someone you are running from, I take it." "My betrothed," Drasha said, and the word tasted like ash. "Or he was until this morning when I fled from our binding ceremony." Dermot's eyebrows rose slightly, but again there was no judgment in his face, only quiet assessment. "You must be exhausted," he said, "and hungry. Come inside. We can talk about the rest after you have eaten." Drasha's legs nearly buckled with relief. "You would help me, just like that. You do not even know me." "I know enough," Dermot said simply. He stepped back from the doorway, gesturing for her to enter. "You came to my gate desperate and alone. That is all I need to know." The cottage interior was warm and surprisingly comfortable. A fire burned in the hearth, over which hung an iron pot that smelled of stew. Shelves lined one wall, filled with clay jars and dried herbs. A simple wooden table sat in the center of the room, with 4 chairs around it. Stairs led up to what Drasha assumed was a sleeping loft. Dermot motioned for her to sit while he ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls. The dog, a friendly creature despite its earlier barking, came over to sniff at Drasha curiously. She extended her hand slowly, and the animal licked her fingers. "That is Barley," Dermot said, setting a bowl before her. "He makes a lot of noise but has never bitten anyone in his life." Drasha ate slowly at first, then faster as her hunger asserted itself. The stew was good, rich with vegetables and herbs, with chunks of tender rabbit meat. Dermot ate across from her, asking no questions, simply letting her fill her belly in peace. When she finally set down her spoon, Drasha met his eyes. "The woman at the trading post said you help people. Orcs specifically, those who need to escape." Dermot nodded. "I do what I can. There are not many humans who will shelter your kind, and I have reason to know what it is like to need a new start." "Why?" Drasha asked bluntly. "Why would a human risk his safety for orcs? We are hated by most of your people, seen as monsters." "I was a soldier once," Dermot said quietly. "Fought in the border wars 10 years back. Saw terrible things on both sides. Saw orcs protecting their children with the same fierce love human parents show. Saw cruelty that had nothing to do with the color of one's skin or the shape of one's teeth." He paused, his fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table. "When I came home, I could not go back to seeing the world the way I had before. So I bought this land, far from towns and their prejudices, and I decided to live differently." Drasha studied him, this strange human with kind eyes and a past that haunted him. "You said you could offer a way out. What did you mean?" Dermot leaned back in his chair. "There is an old law in these territories, rarely used but still binding. If an orc claims sanctuary with a human household, and that human agrees to take responsibility for them, the orc is considered under that human's protection. Any who would pursue them must take their grievance to the territorial magistrate rather than enacting clan justice." "I have never heard of such a law," Drasha said, frowning. "Most have not. It dates back to the first treaties when there were attempts at peace between our peoples. The law was meant to protect orc children who fled abuse or those who wished to leave their clans. It is forgotten by most, but it still exists." Dermot met her gaze steadily. "If you agree to it, I can register you with the magistrate in the village as being under my household's protection. Gormath would have to go through legal channels to reclaim you, which means he would have to prove you belong to him by law. Since you were not yet bound when you fled, he has no legal claim." Hope fluttered in Drasha's chest, fragile as a moth. "And what would this cost me? What would you demand in return?" "Nothing you are not willing to give," Dermot said firmly. "If you stay, you would help with the farm work, that is all. I could use another pair of hands and you would earn your keep honestly. You would have your own space in the loft and your own life. When you are ready to move on, whether that is in a month or a year, you would be free to go." It sounded too good to be true. Drasha had lived her whole life in a world where everything came with strings, where kindness was currency and debts were always collected. "I do not understand," she said slowly. "Why would you do this? What do you truly want from me?" Dermot's expression softened. "I want you to have the chance I had, to choose your own path. That is all." Drasha felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built to survive years of being told her life was not her own. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." The next morning, Dermot saddled his horse and rode to the village to register Drasha's sanctuary status with the magistrate. He left her at the farm with instructions to rest, but Drasha found herself too restless to simply sit. Instead, she explored the property, noting the repairs needed on the goat fence, the weeds threatening the garden, the loose shingles on the cottage roof. When Dermot returned in the late afternoon, he found her in the garden, pulling weeds with focused efficiency. Sweat gleamed on her green skin, and dirt smudged her cheek. "You did not have to start working today," he said, dismounting and leading his horse to the small stable. "I needed something to do with my hands," Drasha replied, straightening. "Did the magistrate give you trouble?" He was surprised, but the law is clear. "He recorded your name and mine in the ledger. You are officially under my household's protection." Dermot paused. "He did say that if your former betrothed comes looking for you, he is legally obligated to tell Gormath where you are staying. The law protects you from clan justice, but it does not keep your whereabouts secret." Drasha nodded grimly. "Gormath will come. It is a matter of when, not if. His pride will demand it. Then we will deal with it when he arrives," Dermot said calmly. "For now, let me show you how things work around here. If you are going to help, you should know the routine." Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Drasha proved to be a tireless worker, her orc strength making quick work of tasks that would have taken Dermot hours. She repaired the fence, cleaned out the stable, and helped him harvest the late-season vegetables. In return, Dermot taught her things she had never learned in the clan: how to preserve food in clay crocks, how to read the sky for weather changes, how to play the simple card game he enjoyed in the evenings. They talked while they worked. Dermot told her about his time as a soldier, about the friend he had lost in the war who had been engaged to a woman Dermot had secretly loved. He spoke of coming home to find that woman married to another, and the relief he had felt rather than heartbreak, because it had freed him to admit he had never truly wanted that life anyway. Drasha, in turn, told him about growing up in the mountain clans, where women were valued only for the strength of the sons they could bear and the alliances they could forge through marriage. She spoke of Gormath, a warrior 20 years her senior who had won her hand by defeating her father in ritual combat. She described the suffocating certainty that her life would be a cycle of childbearing and servitude, respected only when she was too old to be of use. "I wanted to make things," she confessed one evening as they sat by the fire, barley sprawled across her feet. "Beautiful things. I have always loved working with leather and bone, carving patterns, creating art. But in the clan, such work is frivolous for women. We are meant to be practical, useful, nothing more." Dermot was quiet for a moment, then rose and went to a wooden chest in the corner. He returned with a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth and offered it to Drasha. "These were my mother's tools," he said. "She was a leather worker, made saddles and harnesses. She passed 5 years ago, and I have kept these because I could not bear to sell them, but I think she would want them to be used." Drasha unwrapped the bundle with trembling hands. Inside were knives of various sizes, awls, needles, and stamps for creating patterns. They were well-made tools, carefully maintained. She looked up at Dermot and to her horror felt tears prick at her eyes. "I cannot take these. They are too precious." "They are doing no good sitting in a chest," Dermot said gently. "Please, use them. Create your art." That night, Drasha lay in the loft on the simple cot Dermot had set up for her, holding the leather tools against her chest, and let herself cry quietly in the darkness. She could not remember the last time someone had given her something simply because they thought it would make her happy. 3 weeks passed. The autumn deepened, and the trees in the valley blazed with color. Drasha found herself smiling more, laughing at Barley's antics and Dermot's dry jokes. She began working on a leather satchel in the evenings, tooling an intricate pattern of leaves and vines into the surface. Dermot watched her work with quiet appreciation, sometimes reading from one of his handful of books, sometimes simply gazing into the fire. She was acutely aware of him in ways that unsettled her. The way his hands moved when he milked the goats, deft and gentle. The sound of his laughter when she told him stories about her younger brother's mishaps. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, a warmth that held no possession, only genuine affection. Drasha had never felt desire before, not truly. With Gormath, there had been only resignation and a vague dread. But with Dermot, she found herself imagining what it might be like to reach across the space between them, to touch his hand, to learn the taste of his mouth. She pushed the thoughts away. He had offered her sanctuary, nothing more. To read romance into his kindness would be foolish and presumptuous. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite name, and her heart would stutter in her chest. The confrontation came on a gray morning when the first frost silvered the grass. Drasha was in the goat pen, checking their hooves for stones when Barley began barking furiously. She straightened, her heart sinking because she knew that bark. It was the warning. Dermot emerged from the cottage, and together they watched as 3 figures crested the hill leading to the farm. Even at a distance, Drasha recognized the lead figure's hulking frame and the way he moved, all controlled aggression. Gormath had come. "Stay behind me," Dermot said quietly, but Drasha shook her head. "This is my fight. I will face him." "You are under my household's protection," Dermot said, his voice firmer than she had ever heard it. "Which means he goes through me first." They waited by the gate as the 3 orcs approached. Gormath was massive, nearly 7 feet tall, with scars crisscrossing his green arms and a permanent scowl etched into his features. His tusks were longer than Drasha's, filed to sharp points. The 2 orcs with him were his brothers, almost as large, their hands resting on the axes at their belts. Gormath stopped 10 paces from the gate, his eyes fixed on Drasha, and the fury in them made her stomach clench. "There you are, faithless female," he growled. "You have shamed me and my bloodline. You will return with me now to face the clan's judgment." "No," Drasha said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I will not. I am under this human's protection, and by territorial law you cannot touch me." Gormath's lip curled. "Human law means nothing to me. You are mine by clan right. Your father gave you to me in honorable combat." "She was not yet bound," Dermot interjected calmly, "which means she was free to refuse the match. Your claim has no legal standing." Gormath's gaze swung to Dermot, and Drasha saw the calculations happening behind those cold eyes. He was assessing the human, judging whether Dermot would be easy to break. "You dare to interfere in orc business, human. You must have a death wish." "I dare to uphold the law of these territories," Dermot said evenly. "If you have a grievance, take it to the magistrate. Otherwise, you are trespassing on my land." One of Gormath's brothers took a step forward, his hand closing around his axe handle. "Let us just take her, Gormath. One human is not worth the trouble." "The law is clear," Dermot repeated, and now there was steel in his voice. "Harm me or forcibly remove Drasha, and you will be hunted as criminals. The magistrate already has your arrival recorded. He knows you are here." It was a bluff, Drasha realized. The magistrate had no such knowledge, but Dermot delivered it with such confidence that even Gormath hesitated. "You think you can keep her safe forever?" Gormath spat. "You are one man. I can wait. I can watch. The moment you let your guard down, the moment she strays from your protection, I will be there." "Then you will be waiting a very long time," Dermot said. "Because Drasha is not going anywhere unless she chooses to." Gormath's eyes narrowed, and then he did something Drasha did not expect. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I see how it is now. The human wants her for himself. Tell me, small man, have you bedded her yet? Is that why you defend her so fiercely?" Drasha felt heat flood her face, but Dermot did not rise to the bait. "My reasons are my own. You have your answer, Gormath. Leave now, or I will ride to the village and return with the magistrate's guards." For a long moment, the 2 groups faced each other, tension crackling in the air. Then Gormath spat on the ground and turned away. "This is not finished," he called over his shoulder. "You have made an enemy today, human. I will remember this." They watched until the 3 orcs disappeared over the hill. Only then did Drasha release the breath she had been holding. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the gate for support. "He will not let this go," she said quietly. "Gormath is not known for forgiving insults to his pride." "I know," Dermot said. He turned to face her, and his expression was troubled. "Drasha, I need to tell you something. When Gormath accused me of wanting you for myself, I should have denied it more strongly." Drasha's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" Dermot ran a hand through his hair, looking more uncertain than she had ever seen him. "I am saying that somewhere over these past weeks, offering you sanctuary stopped being just about doing the right thing. I care about you, Drasha. More than I should, perhaps. More than is wise." The world seemed to tilt. Drasha stared at him, this kind human man who had given her shelter and tools and respect. "You care about me," she repeated slowly. "In what way?" "In the way that makes me think about you first thing when I wake and last thing before I sleep," Dermot said, the words tumbling out now. "In the way that makes me want to hear your laugh every day. In the way that makes me imagine a future where you choose to stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here, with me." Drasha felt as though she could not breathe. "I am an orc. You are human. Such a thing is not done. We would face hatred from both our peoples." "I know," Dermot said simply. "I know all the reasons it is impossible, but I also know that I have never felt this way before, not with anyone. And if you feel nothing in return, I will understand. I will still protect you, still offer you sanctuary, and I will never mention this again. But I had to tell you the truth." Drasha looked at this man who had offered her freedom, who had taught her gentleness, who had given her mother's tools to a stranger because he thought it would bring her joy. And she realized that somewhere in the rhythm of shared work and evening conversations, somewhere in the safety of his presence and the warmth of his smile, she had fallen into something she had never expected to feel. "I have been trying not to care for you," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Trying to remind myself that you offered shelter, not love, that to hope for more would be to ruin the peace you have given me. But Dermot, every time you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before. Every time you speak to me as an equal, I feel valued. And when Gormath suggested you had bedded me, I found myself wishing it were true, and that shames me because you have been nothing but honorable." Dermot stepped closer, and slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused from work, and they trembled slightly against her green skin. "There is no shame in wanting," he said softly, "only in taking what is not freely offered." Drasha looked down at their joined hands, human and orc, pale and green. Then she looked up into his hazel eyes and said the most terrifying, exhilarating thing she had ever said. "Then I am offering, Dermot Oakes, if you will have me, not as a refugee under your protection, but as a woman who chooses you with her whole heart." Dermot's answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, an old-fashioned gesture that made her breath catch. "I will have you," he whispered, "for as long as you will stay." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to close the distance between them, her tusks bumping gently against his cheek as their lips met. It was awkward and perfect, tentative and sure all at once. Dermot's hands came up to cradle her face, and Drasha felt something in her chest unfurl, some part of her that had been clenched tight her entire life finally relaxing. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dermot rested his forehead against hers. "We will have to be careful," he said. "Gormath will not give up easily, and if word spreads that we are together, there may be others who take issue." "I know," Drasha said, "but I am tired of living my life according to other people's hatred and fear. If you are willing to brave the scorn, then so am I." They stood there in the autumn sunlight, holding each other, and Drasha felt hope bloom in her heart for the first time in memory. The following weeks brought their share of challenges. Word did spread, as they knew it would, and Dermot faced cold stares when he went to the village for supplies. A group of human youths threw stones at him once, calling him an orc lover and worse. He came home with a bruised shoulder and a split lip, but when Drasha tried to tend to his wounds, fury and guilt warring in her chest, he simply kissed her and said it was worth it. From the orc side, there was silence, which worried Drasha more than threats would have. Gormath had not returned, but she could feel his presence like a storm on the horizon, waiting to break. But there was joy too, more joy than Drasha had ever known. Dermot courted her properly, with small gifts and sweet words. He brought her a new leather hide from the village tanner. She carved him a set of buttons from bone, each one etched with a tiny goat. They laughed together, worked together, and at night when the fire burned low they explored the newness of each other's bodies with tenderness and wonder. Drasha had never known that intimacy could be like this, a conversation of touch and breath, a mutual giving and receiving. Gormath would have taken what he wanted with no thought for her pleasure, but Dermot made her feel cherished, desired in a way that honored her rather than diminished her. Winter arrived, bringing snow to the valley. They worked to prepare the farm, insulating the cottage and stocking the root cellar. Drasha proved surprisingly skilled at hunting, bringing down rabbits and once even a deer with her strong bow. Dermot taught her to ice skate on the frozen pond, holding her hands as she wobbled and cursed and eventually found her balance. It was during a cold snap in deep winter that Gormath made his second appearance. Drasha had gone out early to break ice in the goat's water trough. The sun was barely up, painting the snow pink and gold, and her breath plumed in the frigid air. She had her back to the barn when she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. She spun, reaching for the knife at her belt, but Gormath was already there, his huge hand closing around her wrist. "Alone at last," he growled. "I have been watching, waiting. Your human cannot protect you every moment." "Let me go," Drasha said, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the fear hammering in her chest. "You have no right to touch me." "I have every right. You were mine, promised, and paid for. Your father's blood honor is staked on this match." Gormath's grip tightened, and Drasha felt her bones grind together. "You will return with me, or I will kill your human and burn his farm to the ground. Those are your choices." "There is a third choice," came Dermot's voice from behind Gormath. The big orc spun, and Drasha saw that Dermot held his old sword, the one he had told her hung on the wall as a reminder of the man he no longer wished to be. He held it with the ease of long practice, and his face was set in hard lines. "You wish to fight me, human," Gormath laughed. "You are half my size. I will break you." "Perhaps," Dermot said evenly. "But I am faster than I look, and I was trained by the best swordsman in the king's army. You will not take Drasha without going through me, and I promise you, even if you win, you will carry scars from this fight that will remind you of your foolishness every day for the rest of your life." Gormath released Drasha and pulled his axe from his belt. "So be it, little man. If you wish to die for orc trash, I will grant your wish." "No," Drasha shouted. "Stop this. Gormath, I will not return with you even if you kill him. All you will accomplish is murder, and then the law truly will hunt you." "The law is slow and far away," Gormath said, advancing on Dermot. "And I am here now." He swung his axe in a brutal arc that should have cleaved Dermot's head from his shoulders, but Dermot moved like water, flowing aside and bringing his sword up in a slash that opened a red line across Gormath's ribs. The orc bellowed and swung again, and again Dermot danced away, his blade flickering out to cut Gormath's arm. Drasha watched in horrified awe as the two fought. Gormath was power and rage, every blow strong enough to shatter bones. But Dermot was speed and precision, never where Gormath expected him to be, his sword leaving a dozen shallow cuts that began to add up. But Dermot was also only human, and the exertion in the deep cold was taking its toll. His breathing grew labored, his movements a fraction slower. Gormath saw it and pressed his advantage, driving Dermot back toward the cottage wall. Drasha could not stand by any longer. She snatched up the hammer she had been using on the ice and ran forward, swinging it with all her strength at the back of Gormath's knee. The joint buckled and the big orc went down with a roar. Dermot's sword was immediately at his throat. "Yield," Dermot gasped, "or I will end this now." Gormath glared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. Then his gaze shifted to Drasha, who stood with the hammer still gripped in both hands. "You would strike your own kind," he said, and there was something almost like hurt beneath the anger. "For a human." "I would strike anyone who threatens someone I love," Drasha said fiercely. "Orc or human matters nothing to me. You are the one who made this about violence, Gormath. I only ever wanted to choose my own path. And you have chosen this." Gormath gestured at Dermot with his chin. "A tiny farm and a human who will age and die while you are still in your prime. This is what you flee to." "I have chosen freedom," Drasha said. "And love and respect, and a partner who sees me as more than a womb to carry sons. If you cannot understand that, then you are even more pitiful than I thought." Something shifted in Gormath's expression. The fury drained away, leaving only a weary bitterness. "Keep her then," he said to Dermot. "I am done chasing a female who values me so little. But know this, both of you. You will find no peace in this world. Humans will hate you for lying with an orc, and orcs will despise you for abandoning your people. You condemn yourselves to a life on the margins." "We have already made our peace with that," Dermot said quietly. "Now go, and do not come back." Gormath rose slowly, clutching his bleeding knee. He looked at Drasha one last time, and she saw the moment he truly let her go, the moment his pride finally accepted defeat. He turned and limped away through the snow, leaving a trail of blood drops behind him. Dermot lowered his sword, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Drasha dropped the hammer and pulled him into her arms, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. "You could have died," she whispered fiercely. "You foolish, brave man." "So could you," Dermot said, pulling back to look at her. "That was incredibly reckless, attacking him like that." "I could say the same of you," Drasha said, and felt a slightly hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. "We are a pair of fools, are we not? The best kind," Dermot agreed and kissed her deeply. They went inside and tended each other's wounds, Dermot's minor and Drasha's just bruising from Gormath's grip. Then they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, and talked quietly about what would come next. "Gormath was right about one thing," Drasha said. "We will face prejudice. My people will see me as a traitor, and yours will see you as corrupted. The life we build will not be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Dermot said. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "But I have a proposal for you if you will hear it." Drasha's heart stuttered. "What kind of proposal?" Dermot shifted to face her fully, his expression serious but warm. "Marry me, Drasha Emberfang, not by orc law or human custom, but by our own choice. Let us make vows to each other here before the fire, with no witnesses but barley and the goats. Let us declare ourselves bound, not because tradition demands it, but because we choose it freely." Tears pricked at Drasha's eyes. "You would truly bind yourself to me?" For all your life. I would, Dermot said simply. I love you, Drasha. I love your strength and your laughter, your skill with leather and your terrible singing voice when you think I cannot hear. I love the way you hog the blankets and the way you always save the best bits of dinner for me. I love you, and I want to spend whatever days I have at your side. Drasha could barely speak through the emotion clogging her throat. I love you too, she managed. You who showed me that kindness is not weakness, that choosing my own path is not selfish. You who gave me tools to create with and space to breathe, and a love I never imagined possible. Yes, Dermot Oakes, I will marry you. They spoke their vows there as the winter sun climbed higher and filled the cottage with pale light. They promised to stand by each other, to share the burdens and the joys, to choose each other every day for as long as they lived. There were no rings, no ceremonial words borrowed from any tradition. Just two people from different worlds, declaring that they belonged to each other by the only law that mattered, the law of their own hearts. Afterward, Dermot produced a bottle of honey wine he had been saving, and they drank to their future. They made love slowly by the fire, their bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle, and Drasha felt a completeness she had never known existed. The winter gradually loosened its grip, and spring arrived in a rush of green and birdsong. True to Gormath's prediction, they did face difficulties. The villagers grew colder toward Dermot, and fewer would trade with him. But a handful of people, those with open hearts or their own reasons for questioning prejudice, continued to offer their friendship. An elderly human woman who had lost her orc husband to clan violence brought them preserves and kind words. A young orc man who had fled his own arranged marriage found his way to their gate and stayed for a month, helping with the spring planting before moving on to seek his fortune further south. Drasha's skill with leatherwork grew, and she began producing goods that Dermot could sell in the village. Her intricate tooling was unlike anything the humans had seen, and despite their misgivings about her, they could not deny the quality of her work. Slowly, grudgingly, she earned a measure of respect. They expanded the farm, building a larger barn and acquiring chickens and 2 pigs. Dermot taught Drasha letters, and she taught him some of the orc language. They created a life together, brick by brick, day by day. In the quiet moments, Drasha sometimes thought about the life she had left behind. She thought about her family, whom she would likely never see again. She thought about Gormath and hoped he had found some measure of peace. She thought about the orc woman who had given her Dermot's name at the trading post, and she sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the universe. One evening, in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Dermot said, "Do you ever regret it, choosing this life?" Drasha looked at him, at this man who had given her everything by offering her nothing but choice, and smiled. "Not for a single moment," she said truthfully. "This is the life I was meant for, this farm, this love, you." Dermot pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. Barley lay at their feet, and from the barn came the soft sounds of the animals settling for the night. It was peaceful. It was home. And it was theirs, built not on the foundations of duty or tradition, but on the strongest foundation of all. 2 people who had chosen each other freely, and who would continue to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. In the years that followed, they weathered storms both literal and figurative. There were hard winters when the crops failed and harder times when prejudice flared and threatened violence. But there were also springs full of new life, summers rich with harvest, and autumns painted in glory. There were quiet nights by the fire and wild nights of passion. There were arguments and make-ups, laughter and tears, and 1,000 small moments that wove together into a tapestry of shared life. Other orcs came to their gate seeking sanctuary, and Drasha and Dermot helped everyone. Some stayed only briefly before moving on. Others settled nearby, building their own small homesteads, until a handful of families formed a loose community of those who had chosen love over tradition, acceptance over hate. Dermot grew older, his brown hair going gray at the temples, his face gaining lines from years of sun and laughter. Drasha remained strong and vital, her orc blood slowing her aging, and she tried not to think too hard about the day when he would grow old while she remained in her prime, just as Gormath had warned. But Dermot, as if reading her thoughts one evening many years into their marriage, took her face in his weathered hands and said, "I would not trade a single day with you for 1,000 years without you. Whatever time we have is enough, my love." And Drasha believed him, because that was what their life had taught her, that love measured by depth, not duration, and that choosing each other again and again was the bravest and most powerful magic in any world. She had come to his gate desperate and alone, bound to a suitor she never loved, seeking nothing more than escape. And Dermot Oakes had offered her something far greater than sanctuary. He had offered her freedom, respect, and a love that asked nothing but gave everything. And together, against all odds and in defiance of all prejudice, they had built a life worth living. A life chosen freely, lived fully, and bound not by duty but by the unshakable certainty that they belonged to each other. It was more than Drasha had ever dared to dream, and it was everything she would ever need. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and Dermot's hand was warm in hers, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of their neighbors calling their children home to dinner. This small community of outcasts and dreamers, humans and orcs and those in between, all of them choosing a different path, all of them free. Drasha smiled and leaned her head on Dermot's shoulder and felt the deep contentment of a heart that had finally found its home.